The courtroom was silent, almost reverent, as Alexa Joel stepped through the heavy oak doors. Her heels echoed on the marble floor, each step a quiet defiance. The air was thick with tension, and the eyes of journalists, spectators, and legal staff followed her every move. She straightened her blazer, lifted her chin, and met their stares head-on. At the bench sat Judge Richard Halberd, an aging man with sharp glasses and a sharper tongue, known in tabloids as the celebrity slayer for his harsh judgments against anyone with a famous last name. He didn't even try to hide the smirk on his face. Alexa Joel wasn't just another defendant to him. She was the daughter of a music icon, Billy Joel, the piano man himself. And that meant she didn't deserve the benefit of the doubt, not in his courtroom. But this wasn't a concert. This was a trial. A trial where Alexa stood accused of orchestrating a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme tied to a non-profit she co-founded. Her name had been dragged through headlines, her image twisted into something unrecognizable. Yet here she was, determined not to be broken. She sat down beside her young attorney, Linda Harlow, a recent law graduate with fire in her eyes. No top-dollar legal team, no PR shield, just truth and grit. The prosecution thought they'd already won. The judge seemed ready to sign the verdict before opening statements. But what none of them knew was that this trial would be remembered, not for the charges, not for the scandal, but for the moment when the unexpected happened, and everything changed. Stay with us, because what unfolds in this courtroom will challenge your idea of justice, prejudice, and redemption. Don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The gavel struck wood with a crack that sliced through the murmurs of the courtroom. "All rise," the bailiff announced with practiced monotony. Judge Richard Halberd entered from the side door, his black robe flowing behind him like a storm cloud. His expression was carved in stone, unreadable to most. But Alexa saw the flicker in his eyes when their gazes met. It wasn't curiosity, it was judgment, pure and cold. "Be seated," he said, his voice gravelly, as if dragged through years of cynicism. Alexa sank slowly into her chair, her fingers tight around the edge of the defense table. Beside her, Linda Harlow tapped a pen against her legal pad, glancing at her client with a silent nod. Young, maybe too young, but smart, and the only one who had believed in Alexa when the walls began to close in. "This is case number 4732B, the state of New York versus Alexa Joel," the clerk declared. The prosecutor, Victor Klein, adjusted his tie and stood with a slight flourish, his every movement calculated. He reminded Alexa of a politician more than a lawyer, slick, confident, dangerous. As he launched into his opening statement, the courtroom seemed to lean toward him, captivated. He painted a picture of greed, manipulation, and betrayal. Alexa, the privileged daughter of a rock legend using her non-profit as a personal piggy bank. His words were polished, his tone rehearsed. At one point, he even held up a printed tabloid cover with Alexa's face beneath the headline, "Daddy's Little Fraud." Judge Halberd chuckled. Linda stood next. She was nervous but not timid. Her voice didn't project like Victor's, but it carried sincerity. She spoke of context, of an unbalanced investigation, of a rush to judgment, of trust violated not by Alexa, but by someone else. She tried to humanize her client, but the judge cut her off twice. "Stick to the facts, Ms. Harlow," he said with a condescending glance over his glasses. "This isn't a therapy session." Snickers rippled through the gallery. Alexa's jaw tightened. As the first witness was called, an accountant who once worked with the non-profit, Alexa's mind wandered. Not because she wasn't listening, but because she'd lived every detail of this already, 1,000 times over. The papers, the betrayal, the arrest, the way people who once called her friend vanished like smoke. She watched the jurors closely. Most looked neutral, perhaps overwhelmed. But one, a middle-aged woman in a blue cardigan, kept glancing at Alexa with something more than indifference. Curiosity, sympathy, or doubt. The witness claimed irregularities in the non-profit's finances and implied Alexa had direct access. Linda tried to push back during cross-examination, asking whether the witness had seen Alexa authorize any transactions herself. No, he admitted, but she was listed as a co-founder. That kind of access comes with the title. The judge leaned forward. Intent can be inferred by behavior, Ms. Harlow. You'd do well to remember that. Alexa swallowed hard. By midday, the judge called for a recess. Reporters scrambled out of the room, already crafting the headlines for the evening. Linda turned to Alexa and whispered, "Don't let him get in your head." Alexa forced a smile. "He's already in it." They stepped into the hallway, where cameras waited behind velvet ropes. Flashbulbs erupted. A reporter shouted, "Alexa, are you guilty? Is your father coming to bail you out?" She kept walking. Back inside, the courtroom began to refill. The judge returned, sipping coffee from a mug that read, "Justice is served." Klein stood ready to call his next witness. Alexa sat down again, feeling the weight of the room shift, not in her favor. But she wasn't here to be liked. She was here to be heard. And if no one would listen, then she'd make them. Then, 2 months before the courtroom lights and the headlines, Alexa Joel had stood barefoot in the garden of her Brooklyn brownstone, cradling a cup of tea in shaking hands. It was early spring, and the flowers she had planted with such care just a year ago had begun to bloom again, mocking her with their quiet return to life, while hers seemed to be falling apart. The email had come at dawn. Subject line: Urgent. Formal charges filed. Manhattan DA's office. She didn't open it right away. She didn't need to. She already knew. The storm had started with a whisper, a few missing documents, a delay in payroll for the staff of EchoMind, the mental health non-profit she had co-founded with Thomas Graves. At first, she thought it was a clerical issue. Then came the questions from the board. Then the audit. And finally, the betrayal. Thomas. Even thinking his name made her stomach turn. He had been magnetic, brilliant, articulate, and passionate about creating emotional wellness spaces for underprivileged teens. Alexa, who had long struggled to find purpose outside the looming shadow of her father's fame, saw in EchoMind a chance to do something meaningful. She had invested her time, her money, and most importantly, her name. It had taken less than a year for everything to unravel. According to prosecutors, hundreds of thousands of dollars had been funneled from donor contributions into private accounts. Lavish dinners, weekend retreats, and suspicious consulting fees, all signed off under the organization's name. What made it worse was that Alexa's name was on the foundation's financial authorization forms, something Thomas had convinced her to do for transparency. He had insisted on handling the books personally, citing trust issues with external accountants. Naively, she had agreed. Now that trust was being used against her. She remembered the day she confronted him. It was raining hard, and they were in the organization's downtown office, walls lined with motivational posters and shelves filled with unread books. She held the printed bank records in her hand like a weapon. "You lied to me," she said. Thomas didn't flinch. He leaned against his desk, arms folded, calm. "No, Lex," he said. "I protected you. Do you think donors give because of the cause? They give because of you. Because you're Billy Joel's daughter, you're the brand. I made sure you looked clean." Her blood had gone cold. "I never wanted to look clean," she whispered. "I wanted to be clean." Thomas had sighed, as if she were a child who didn't understand the rules of the adult world. By then, it was too late. She had already gone to the board, already brought in outside counsel. The DA's office had picked up the case within weeks, but somehow Thomas had spun the narrative faster. Whispers of Alexa's involvement spread like gasoline. Her last name became a headline. Even her own father had called her, voice laced with quiet pain. "I told you to get a better lawyer," he said. "This guy, Thomas, I never liked him." She didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She remembered her publicist begging her to disappear for a while, to let it blow over. But Alexa refused. She had done nothing wrong. And if she ran, people would assume she had. So she stayed. She faced the subpoenas, the interrogations, the cold stares of former donors. And now she sat in court, watching that same Thomas Graves sit smugly in the gallery, arms crossed, wearing the same tailored suit and fake smile. He wasn't on trial. She was. Linda leaned over and whispered, "That's him, right?" Alexa nodded slowly, never taking her eyes off him. "I hope the jury sees what I see," Linda muttered. "I don't care what they see," Alexa replied. "I care what they believe." Outside the courtroom, cameras still flashed, but inside a darker lens was taking shape, one that blurred guilt and innocence with every word spoken, and the shadow of the past was growing longer by the hour. The courtroom felt colder on the second day. Not physically, the temperature was the same, but something in the atmosphere had shifted. Alexa could feel it as soon as she stepped through the door. The buzz of curiosity had dulled into judgment. The whispers were no longer, "Who is she?" but "She's guilty, right?" Linda adjusted the sleeves of her blazer as they took their seats. Her legal pad was already filled with notes, scribbled lines crisscrossing margins. She was learning fast, perhaps faster than anyone in that courtroom expected her to. "Today's witness will set the tone," she whispered to Alexa. "We need to stay alert." The prosecution called their next witness, Harold Denning, a forensic accountant hired by the state to analyze EchoMind's financial records. He took the stand with the air of a man who had testified many times before, calm, confident, utterly convinced of his own conclusions. He pointed to spreadsheets projected on the screen, highlighting line items he believed showed misappropriation of funds. "These expenses were approved by Ms. Joel's signature," he said, tapping the laser pointer against her name. Repeatedly, over a 6-month span, Alexa stared at the screen, her stomach sinking. She had seen those documents before. She hadn't signed half of them. Linda rose for the cross-examination. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "Mr. Denning, were you aware that EchoMind's internal communications were handled almost entirely by Mr. Graves? That's irrelevant to the financial. Just answer the question, please." "Yes," he said after a pause. "And were you given access to any internal emails or messages where Ms. Joel objected to certain expenses?" "I was told they weren't available." Linda stepped forward. "Would it surprise you to know they were deleted from the organization's servers shortly after the investigation began?" "Objection, sustained." The judge shot Linda a warning look. "Ms. Harlow, unless you can present actual evidence of tampering, keep your speculations to yourself." Linda nodded, biting her tongue. Back at the defense table, Alexa whispered, "You did great." But Linda didn't smile. As the day wore on, Alexa felt her presence shrinking beneath the weight of assumption. Every time she opened her mouth, even to clarify something, the judge's expression darkened. At one point, she tried to explain why she had signed a document without knowing its full context. The judge interrupted. "Ms. Joel, we're not interested in emotional rationalizations. Stick to what's provable." That word echoed in her mind. Provable. Was innocence a matter of proof or perception? The jurors' faces offered no answers, except one. Juror number 6, the woman in the blue cardigan, kept watching Alexa with a quiet intensity. Not pity, something deeper. Perhaps recognition, perhaps doubt. During a short recess, Linda sat with Alexa on a bench outside the courtroom. Sunlight streamed in through the high windows, casting long shadows on the marble floor. "He's shutting us down," Linda said. "Every time I try to give you space to speak, he cuts it off. He doesn't want a story, he wants a conviction." Alexa didn't respond right away. She watched a bailiff escort a reporter out of the hallway for sneaking a photo. Then she turned to Linda and said, "My voice has been dismissed my whole life, not because of what I've done, but because of who I am." Linda nodded. "Then let's change that. One line at a time." Later, as the next witness took the stand, a former intern who barely remembered Alexa's role, the defense table remained quiet. Alexa's name was mentioned again and again, but always in the third person, never with her own voice. She was in the room, she was living this, and yet no one truly heard her. But that was about to change. The courtroom emptied for lunch, but Alexa stayed in her seat. Her hands rested on the polished wood table, fingers spread wide, like she was trying to ground herself. Around her, the echoes of mourning testimonies lingered like smoke. Words twisted into weapons, half-truths spoken with conviction. Linda had stepped out to take a call from the firm. Alexa welcomed the moment alone. Across the room, the judge's bench loomed in silence, tall, impersonal, unmoved. She stared at it, her thoughts drifting, not into the legal strategy ahead, but backward. Farther back than she usually allowed herself to go. She was 15 again, standing backstage at Madison Square Garden, the lights still humming after her father's encore. Billy Joel, larger than life, drenched in sweat and applause, had pulled off another legendary performance. Back then, the world loved him for his music. She loved him because on stage he was untouchable, but off stage, he had always felt just a little bit out of reach. "Did you see me?" he asked, smiling, towel over his shoulder. She nodded. "Every second. You like the new set list? It's perfect." He handed her a bottle of water and ruffled her hair. "That's my girl." Moments like that were rare, golden and fleeting. Her parents' divorce had been messy, a tangle of tabloids, tours, and bitterness. After her mother's death, Alexa had drifted farther from her father, not because of resentment, but because of distance, time. Different worlds. She didn't want to live in his shadow, but she also didn't know how to fully step out of it. When she launched Echo Mind, she hadn't told him right away. She wanted to prove she could build something on her own, that she was more than just the daughter of... He found out through a magazine article. He called that night. "You should have told me," he said, voice low. "I wanted it to be mine," she replied. He hesitated. "I get that, but if something goes wrong, I won't always be able to fix it." She had hated that comment at the time. It felt like doubt, not concern. Now, sitting in a courtroom with everything going wrong, his words echoed differently. Linda returned and sat beside her, noticing the faraway look on Alexa's face. "You okay?" she asked gently. Alexa blinked and nodded. "Yeah, just old stuff." "Family?" "Something like that." Linda didn't press. She had learned quickly that Alexa protected her past like a wound, visible but unspoken. Back in session, the prosecution pushed forward. More documents, more numbers, more implications, and behind it all, the same silent accusation: "You should have known." Alexa watched as Thomas Graves leaned into the gallery railing, whispering something to a reporter. His smirk was casual, his confidence unshaken. He looked like a man attending a show, not the man who set the stage. The prosecution entered a photo into evidence. It was Alexa at a fundraising gala, laughing with Thomas beside a massive donation check. "Exhibit D," Klein said, holding the photo toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a woman unaware of her organization's finances. This is someone in control. This is someone complicit." Objection. Overruled. Alexa looked at the photo. She remembered that night. The laughter wasn't joy, it was forced. She'd already begun to suspect something was wrong, but she had smiled anyway. For the cameras, for the donors, for the illusion. In her mind, the image crumpled like paper. By the time the gavel struck again for the afternoon break, Alexa felt drained. Her past wasn't just being questioned, it was being rewritten. She stepped out into the hallway away from the crowd and pulled out her phone. For a moment, she hovered over her father's contact, just his name on a screen. Billy. She didn't call, not yet. But for the first time since the trial began, she thought about what it would feel like if he walked through those courtroom doors. The next morning, a storm rolled over Manhattan. Rain streaked the courthouse windows like ink spilling down glass, and thunder echoed faintly in the distance. Alexa arrived early, umbrella in hand, but her thoughts were louder than the storm. She hadn't slept. Thomas was winning, not by facts, but by presence. His smirks, his staged reactions, his whispers to reporters that turned into headlines before the day was done. Alexa had grown up in the shadow of fame. She knew the power of a well-placed look, but this wasn't a stage. This was her life. As she waited outside the courtroom doors, someone approached her, a woman in her late 30s with a press badge and a notebook clutched under one arm. "Alexa Joel?" the woman asked softly. Alexa hesitated. "Yes?" I'm Mariana Diaz, investigative journalist, East Side Tribune. I'm not here for a quote. I'm here because something about this case doesn't sit right with me. Alexa blinked. You're the first one to say that. Mariana gave a small smile. I've covered enough trials to know when the public's being fed a story with holes. I did a deep dive on Thomas Graves last night. You're not the first partner he's left in flames. Alexa raised an eyebrow. You found something? Not yet, but I will. And when I do, I'll make sure it's on the record, whether the court accepts it or not. Before Alexa could respond, the doors opened, and Linda appeared, already scanning her notes. Who's that? She asked as they walked in. Maybe someone who sees the cracks, Alexa replied. Finally. Inside, court resumed with the monotony of procedure. More documents, more analysis. But the fatigue was setting in, on the jury, on the gallery, even on the judge. Eyes glazed, attention wandered. It was the perfect moment for the defense to shift the rhythm. Linda stood and called their first surprise witness, Emily Sloan. The gallery stirred. Emily was a former program coordinator at EXPELLED, terminated by Thomas Graves just weeks before the investigation began. She walked to the stand with a nervous stiffness, her fingers clutching the edge of the chair as she sat. Mrs. Sloan, Linda began, can you describe your role at EXPELLED? I handled daily operations, program scheduling, budgeting oversight, donor correspondence. I reported to both Ms. Joel and Mr. Graves. And why were you terminated? Emily hesitated. I asked too many questions. Questions about what? Missing funds, unexplained transfers. I emailed Thomas about it. Copied Alexa once. A week later, I was let go. Linda's eyes flicked to the judge. Your Honor, we'd like to enter into evidence a series of internal emails between Ms. Sloan and Mr. E. Graves dated 2 months before the financial discrepancies were made public. The prosecution objected. The judge reviewed the documents silently, then nodded. Admissible. Proceed. On the screen appeared a thread of emails. Emily's questions, Thomas's vague responses, and one particular line that made Alexa's breath hitch. Let me worry about the numbers, Emily. You just focus on keeping things pretty for the board. The courtroom shifted. For the first time, something cracked in the prosecution's wall. Victor Klein stood, trying to cast doubt on Emily's credibility, emphasizing her termination, her lack of direct access to final accounts. But her quiet composure remained unshaken. I didn't have access to the bank accounts, she said, but I had eyes. I saw what was happening, and when I spoke up, I was silenced. When she stepped down, she passed by Alexa and gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Outside, the storm had slowed. Rain still tapped against the glass, but the sky was lighter now. Alexa leaned toward Linda. That felt different, Linda nodded. It's not everything, but it's something. And sometimes the smallest shift is enough to change the course of a tide. By the end of the day, Alexa felt the pressure pressing down on her like a second skin, invisible but suffocating. Every breath she took felt like defiance. Every word spoken in her defense a pebble thrown against a wall of steel. Emily's testimony had helped. She could tell from the way the jury leaned forward during her cross-examination, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. And she knew it. Back at the defense table, Linda flipped through her binder, her brow furrowed. I can't shake the feeling that we're missing something, she muttered. Emily was solid, but Graves still isn't exposed directly. Everything so far is circumstantial. Alexa didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on Thomas, who sat across the room like a king surveying a kingdom he had already conquered. His expression hadn't changed since day one, relaxed, dismissive, confident. He believed he was untouchable, and maybe he was. During the afternoon session, Linda requested to recall Emily briefly for clarification on the timeline of her emails. The judge agreed, though reluctantly. Make it quick, he warned. This court doesn't have time for repetition. Emily took the stand again. She clarified that the emails in question had been sent in the final weeks of her employment, a time when internal panic was beginning to simmer. But then she paused, frowning slightly. There was one more email, she said slowly, but I never got a reply. Linda turned sharply. You didn't mention a final message before. It was to Alexa, Emily said, the day I was fired. I forwarded her screenshots, account activity. I told her she needed to check everything herself. Alexa froze. I never saw that email, she said under her breath. Linda's voice sharpened. Could it have been intercepted? Emily hesitated. Thomas had access to internal routing systems. It wouldn't be hard for him to filter or delete messages. The gallery stirred. A quiet gasp rippled through the back row. The judge raised an eyebrow but said nothing. When Emily stepped down, Alexa leaned toward Linda. I need to talk to IT at EchoMind. If there's a backup, anything. Linda stopped her. They've already cleared the servers, remember? Alexa nodded, her heart pounding, but something inside her clicked into place. Graves hadn't just stolen money. He had stolen time, voices, warnings, and now hers. During the break, Mariana Diaz approached again, her phone in hand. I've been digging, she said, lowering her voice. Graves was involved with a startup 5 years ago, collapsed under similar accusations, but charges never stuck. Key witnesses disappeared, records were archived. Alexa narrowed her eyes. You think he buried them? I think he paid to make it all go away. Mariana showed her a grainy screenshot, a photo of Thomas at a conference alongside a man named Bennett Rourke, a known legal fixer with a reputation for making inconvenient problems vanish. This guy moves in shadows, Mariana said, but he's left fingerprints. Alexa looked at the screen, then up at Mariana. How you can prove it? Not yet, she said, but I will. Inside, the judge returned from chambers. Court resumed, but Alexa's mind wasn't on the witness anymore. It was on the email she never received, the one that could have changed everything, and the silence it left behind. As Linda questioned another minor witness, Alexa sat still, replaying Emily's words. I told her she needed to check everything herself, but she never had the chance. That single truth, stolen, buried, deleted, had cost her her reputation, her future, her peace, and now it might cost her freedom. But there was one thing Thomas hadn't counted on. She wasn't alone anymore, and the truth, no matter how deeply buried, was starting to surface. The hallway outside the courtroom was quiet, almost eerily so. Alexa stood by the vending machine, a cold bottle of water pressed to her forehead. Her thoughts were loud, restless, but they were also sharper than they had been in days. Linda joined her with a small paper bag of almonds and handed it over without a word. The two sat down on a bench beneath a faded portrait of a former Chief Justice. We're out of time, Linda said quietly. 1 or 2 more witnesses at most before closing arguments. Alexa unscrewed the bottle cap. Then we need to hit back, hard. Linda nodded, flipping open her notebook. I've been sketching strategy. Graves isn't on trial, but we need the jury to feel like he should be. Mariana might be able to help, Alexa said. She found links to another scandal. Graves and a fixer named Rourke. We can't use it in court, but the press can. And pressure changes perception. Linda smiled faintly. You're getting good at this. I'm getting tired of being quiet. Inside the courtroom, the mood had shifted. The jury wasn't leaning away anymore. They were watching, waiting. There was a sense that something was building, just out of reach. Linda called their next witness, Dr. Kevin Amir, a former board member of EchoMind who had resigned without public explanation just before the investigation broke. He walked to the stand slowly, hands folded, a measured calm in his steps. Dr. Amir, Linda began, why did you resign from the board? He looked directly at the jury. Because I saw a train coming and no one wanted to stop it. Gasps flickered through the gallery. Linda kept her tone steady. Can you elaborate? Thomas Graves ran that organization like a personal enterprise. He stonewalled every audit, dismissed concerns, and he used Alexa as a shield, kept her in the spotlight so no one would look behind the curtain. Did Ms. Joel ever participate in those financial meetings? Rarely. When she did, Thomas talked over her. Once she asked about donor tracking. The next day, she was left off the invite list. The judge raised a brow but said nothing. For once. Linda pressed further. Why didn't you speak out earlier? Dr. Amir hesitated. I didn't have proof, just patterns, and honestly, I was scared. Graves is connected. He knows how to make problems disappear. Alexa swallowed hard. She wasn't imagining it. Thomas had built a system designed to silence people, but now, one by one, those people were beginning to speak. As Dr. Amir stepped down, Victor Klein tried to recover. He framed Amir as a disgruntled ex-member with no hard evidence. But something had changed in the jury's posture. Even juror number 6 had started writing notes again. During the recess, Linda and Alexa returned to the defense table to prep their closing moves. The final pieces were falling into place, but there was still one glaring problem. Alexa leaned in. We need something undeniable, something that forces even him to flinch. Linda nodded slowly. Then we do the one thing he won't expect. What? We call you to the stand. Alexa blinked. That's risky. It's necessary, Linda said. You've been a ghost in your own trial. That ends tomorrow. Across the room, Thomas glanced their way. He raised his coffee cup slightly like a silent toast. Alexa stared back, unblinking. You're right, she said. It ends tomorrow. That night, Alexa sat alone at her kitchen table, surrounded by folders, timelines, and scribbled notes. The rain had stopped, and the air outside felt thick with the scent of something new. Not peace, not yet, but change. She opened her laptop and began typing her testimony by hand. No lawyers, no PR, just truth. For the first time in this trial, she wasn't waiting for someone to save her. She was preparing to speak, and this time the whole room would listen. The courtroom lights felt harsher that morning, buzzing faintly above like they knew something was about to break. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Reporters, onlookers, even a few curious interns who had begun treating the trial like theater. But for Alexa, nothing about today felt performative. Today she would speak. Linda straightened the lapels of her blazer as she opened her briefcase. Her hands moved efficiently, but Alexa could tell she hadn't slept either. The pages of her notes were filled with last-minute annotations, lines crossed and rewritten in red ink. We're calling you second, Linda said. After IT. It? Alexa asked. Linda smiled slightly. Mariana came through. She found someone. The courtroom rose as Judge Halbert entered. He looked more tired than usual, as if the weight of public scrutiny had finally caught up with him. He didn't make a joke this time. He didn't smirk. Linda stood. Your Honor, the defense would like to call Mr. Owen Bryce, former IT technician at EchoMind. A young man in his 20s walked nervously to the stand, thick glasses sliding down his nose, a manila folder tucked under one arm. He was the kind of person easily overlooked, until he wasn't. Mr. Bryce, Linda began, can you explain your role at EchoMind? I handled email servers, data backups, internal system maintenance. I had administrative access. Did you ever witness any unusual activity regarding staff communication? Yes. During the final weeks before the investigation, several email accounts, including Ms. Joel's, were set to auto-filter messages from specific employees into the trash. A stir moved through the courtroom. Who made those changes? I traced the activity to Thomas Graves's administrator login. He'd instructed me to clean up the inboxes for legal purposes. I didn't realize what it meant until later. Did you preserve any of that data? Mr. Bryce opened the folder and held up a printed email. Emily's final warning forwarded to Alexa's inbox, filtered out before it was ever seen. I backed up the logs before I left the company. I brought them with me. Objection overruled. The email appeared on screen. Alexa stared at it. There it was, her name, the warning, the truth, swallowed and now finally unearthed. The jury leaned forward as Linda walked them through the timeline, the setup, the deletion, the silence. Klein tried to discredit Owen Bryce, painting him as a low-level employee acting outside his scope, but the evidence was digital, undeniable, time-stamped, clean. When Bryce stepped down, Alexa's heart pounded. Her hands trembled in her lap, but not from fear. It was time. Linda stood again. The defense calls Alexa Joel to the stand. The courtroom held its breath. She rose slowly, walked past the gallery, past Thomas, who sat motionless now, jaw clenched, and stepped into the witness box. The oath felt surreal. She repeated the words clearly, her voice steady. When she sat, Linda didn't speak immediately. She just looked at her. "You ready?" she asked. Alexa nodded. "Then let's begin." Linda stepped back. "Ms. Joel, in your own words, tell us what happened." Alexa looked out at the jury, at the judge, at the strangers deciding her future, and then she spoke. "I built Echo Mind because I believed in healing, in honesty. I didn't start a non-profit for attention or for my name. I did it to matter, and I trusted someone I shouldn't have." She told them about the early days, the excitement, the first cracks. The night she confronted Thomas, the email she never saw, she didn't cry, she didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. The words landed like slow thunder, not loud but powerful. And as she spoke, she saw something shift in the jury's eyes. Not pity, not curiosity, belief. And belief changes everything. The courtroom was silent as Alexa finished her testimony. Not silent like before, not the quiet of boredom or ritual, but a deep, charged stillness like the moment before a storm breaks. Even Judge Halberd looked as though he might say something, but didn't. Linda let the pause linger before speaking. "No further questions, Your Honor." Victor Klein stood slowly. He adjusted his jacket, cleared his throat, and approached the stand like a man preparing to dismantle a structure brick by brick. But Alexa didn't flinch. "Ms. Joel," he began, "you claim you didn't know about the financial discrepancies at Echo Mind, but you were a co-founder, yes?" "I was," she said. "You attended fundraisers, you gave speeches, your name was on promotional materials." "Yes. And yet you want this jury to believe you were unaware of where the money was going." Alexa met his eyes. "I didn't say I was unaware of everything. I said I was unaware of the theft." Klein raised a document. "Here's a donor receipt with your digital signature, one of several." "I signed it," Alexa said. "But I wasn't the one who processed the transaction." Klein stepped closer. "You expect us to believe that someone else acted on your behalf, without your knowledge?" She nodded once. "Yes, and now you've seen the emails that prove it." Klein's jaw tightened. He turned toward the jury, trying to reassert control. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a case of convenience. Ms. Joel was involved when it suited her. The press, the praise, the attention. But when things went wrong, suddenly she was blind." Alexa leaned forward slightly. "You're wrong." Klein stopped. "I wasn't blind," she continued. "I was silenced. I asked questions. I was cut out. You've seen the emails, the filters, the patterns. I wasn't just pushed aside. I was deliberately kept in the dark." She turned her gaze to the jury. "And if someone like Thomas Graves can manipulate the system from the inside, even while sitting in that gallery today, untouched, then this trial isn't just about me. It's about whether truth still matters in rooms like this." A beat of silence, then another. Even Klein seemed unsure what to say. He tried one last line. "You claim to be a victim, Ms. Joel, but isn't it true you could have stopped this if you'd paid closer attention?" Alexa looked at him, steady and calm. "I didn't come here to be a victim," she said. "I came here to take responsibility for what I did and to expose what he did. If that's not what this courtroom is for, then tell me what is." Klein turned away. "No further questions," he muttered. Alexa stepped down. As she passed the defense table, Linda gave her a small nod, eyes full of quiet pride. Judge Halberd cleared his throat. "We'll recess until tomorrow morning for final statements." The gavel hit the block. Court adjourned, but no one moved. The gallery sat frozen. The jury didn't stand right away. Even Thomas, for the first time, looked uncomfortable. His confident posture faltered as Alexa walked past him without a glance. Outside, reporters swarmed the doors, but she didn't stop. She didn't need to. That night, Linda and Alexa reviewed the final draft of their closing argument. Alexa sat by the window, watching the lights of the city flicker below. "You did it," Linda said. Alexa didn't answer right away. She was still caught in the moment, in the power of having finally spoken. Not just words, but truth, stripped of polish or fear. "No," she said quietly. "We're doing it. Tomorrow is the last move." Linda smiled. "You think the jury's with us?" Alexa turned back to the city lights. "I don't know. But I think they heard me. And in trials like this, being heard was the first battle. Tomorrow would be the war." The courtroom was at full capacity. Cameras lined the hallway outside, held at bay by security, but their presence pulsed through the walls like static. Inside, the air was tight with anticipation. This was it. Closing statements. Linda stood and faced the jury with no notes in hand, just conviction. "You've heard everything," she began. "Facts, numbers, accusations. But this case isn't just about what's on paper. It's about power, who holds it, who abuses it, and who gets blamed when the dust settles." She walked slowly, letting her words breathe. "Alexa Joel trusted the wrong person. That's true. But since when is trust a crime? The real question is, why was she the one left holding the wreckage while Thomas Graves sits untouched in the gallery, smug, silent, protected by the very system he learned to manipulate?" Klein objected. "Speculative and inflammatory." The judge waved it off. "It's closing. They're allowed to paint the picture." Linda continued. "You saw the emails. You heard from the IT specialist, the board member, the program director, all pointing to a single pattern. Alexa was used, not as a partner, as a shield." She turned to the jury. "If she walks out of here guilty, what message do we send? That it's safer to be the thief than the one who speaks up too late?" Silence followed her final words. She nodded once, returned to the table, and sat. Klein took his turn, polished and controlled. He reframed the case as one of negligence, not malice. "She may not have stolen the money," he said, "but she opened the door, and the law holds people accountable when others get hurt on their watch." He gestured toward Alexa. "She didn't do enough, and that's enough." Then it was over. The judge gave instructions to the jury, and deliberations began. Alexa and Linda waited in a side chamber, pacing silently, time crawling like molasses. Hours passed. At one point, Mariana texted, "News is breaking, stay ready." But she didn't say what kind. Then the door opened. The bailiff stepped in. "They're ready." Alexa stood. Her knees felt unsteady, but her voice was clear. "Let's finish this." They returned to the courtroom. Everyone stood. The jury filed in. Judge Halberd looked over the rim of his glasses. "Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict?" A woman stood. "Juror number 6, the one in the blue cardigan." Her voice didn't shake. "We have, Your Honor. In the matter of the State of New York versus Alexa Joel on the charge of felony embezzlement, how do you find the defendant?" A beat. "Not guilty." The gallery gasped. Alexa exhaled a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Linda gripped her hand. Even the judge blinked. Once, slowly. But the foreperson wasn't done. "On the charge of criminal negligence," Alexa tensed again. "We find the defendant not guilty." The gavel struck. "This court is adjourned." But before the room could erupt, another voice cut through the silence. "Your Honor." Mariana Diaz stood at the edge of the gallery, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. "There's something else." Halberd frowned. "This is highly irregular." She stepped forward, holding a folder. "An investigative report was filed with the Attorney General's office this morning. New evidence implicating Thomas Graves in multiple counts of financial fraud, including manipulation of non-profit funding and witness intimidation." The room turned. Graves, caught mid-movement, froze. The officers approached. "Thomas Graves," one said firmly, "you're under arrest." The gallery broke into chaos. Reporters shouted. Graves protested, tried to grab his phone, but it was too late. The cuffs clicked around his wrists. Alexa watched, unmoving. Justice didn't always come cleanly, but this was something. As Graves was led out, eyes darted toward Alexa, waiting for a reaction. She didn't give them one. Outside, the sky had cleared. The city bustled on as if nothing had changed. But for Alexa Joel, everything had. She had stood her ground. And the truth had finally stood with her. The cameras were gone. The headlines had shifted. And for the first time in months, Alexa Joel sat in her apartment without waiting for the world to crash in through her windows. The trial was over. Her name cleared. But the scars remained. Not just the public ones, but the quiet ones that formed in isolation, in doubt, in the long nights spent questioning everything. She stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching morning light stretch across the city. Below, life moved on, fast, oblivious. But something inside her had changed. She hadn't just survived a legal battle. She had survived being unheard, unseen, underestimated. And she had spoken anyway. A soft ping came from her phone, a message from Linda. They're talking about a book deal, and maybe a TED Talk. Just say the word. Alexa smiled but didn't reply. She wasn't chasing spotlights anymore. She was chasing meaning. On the table lay a stack of letters, handwritten notes from strangers who had followed the case. Some were survivors of similar stories. Some were people who had never believed in the justice system, until now. One letter ended with a line she would never forget. "You made me believe that telling the truth, even when it costs everything, is still worth it." Alexa folded the letter and tucked it away. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a different one. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of truth, of resilience, of speaking up even when it's hard, subscribe to this channel. Because stories like Alexa's aren't just entertainment, they're reminders that justice is more than a verdict. It's a voice,